Antec is back. This is the P110 Luce, the Italian pronunciation, which comes from the Latin lux, although it's the accusative form of lux, which means light. So I guess this case is like lit. Is that the correct way that you say that? Or maybe it's like light, like it's accusative. It's like, I don't know how to say light in an accusative way. Look what I've got here. It's the Antec 900. Yeah, this is from like 10 years ago. And it's got the dust to show, the dust to prove it. This case is a little wider and a little taller than the Antec 900. The Antec 900 had this huge fan in the top for cooling. It worked really well. I mean, this is, you know, an i7 920 with, looks like a 9600 GT, a 700 watt power supply, about 12 gigs of RAM. This amazing copper almond heatsink. Remember those? They did so well. This sort of radial design. Yeah, this was the 130 watt TDP CPU. People would regularly dump 200 watts. This was the case you needed to keep it cool. This case, already starting at a disadvantage because this thing had a big side fan as well. We've got tempered glass on the side, but we've got front and bottom intakes, as well as top and rear exhausts. Will it live up? I don't know. I think we need to put a system in this, don't you? I mean, I think we do. Let's run through the features. First off, it's got the two USB 3.0 front panel connectors, a headphone and a microphone jack for analog, and an HDMI. That's a curious combination. You've got HDMI and USB, but then you've got analog, headphone, and microphone. There are not a lot of motherboards out there that pack really good onboard audio for the front panel audio. You got a dedicated LED button and a power button. I'm not sure I'd issue the LED button for the reset button personally. It would be nice if it could be configured. Maybe it can. No, it can't. Cannot. Having a little A on the thumb screws seems like that would make you crazy because you'd want to make sure the A's are always facing the same direction. Well, the cable area is unusually deep with the area behind the motherboard tray. And you've got quite a lot of clearance for the top here, just between the top of the motherboard, which will be about here, and the top of the case. Certainly not enough for a push-pull configuration, but probably enough for a 280 millimeter radiator. Now this case does come with front and rear 120 millimeter fans pre-installed. You could relocate those if you want. Another nice feature I've noticed is that the dust filter on the bottom is reversible. So you can take it out, flip it around, you don't have to worry about getting it right in terms of front to back. No matter which way you put it in, well, I mean, I guess you could put it in sideways, but surely no one is that dumb to point out something like that in the comments. So for cable management, this case is pretty aces. It's got the cable management bracket at the front to cover, you know, your power input for your motherboard and SATA and that kind of thing. It also has a GPU retention bracket, which is built into that, which is pretty genius. I mean, it's so obvious, and you know, a lot of the most brilliant ideas really are. So this will hold really heavy graphics cards like the MSI Gaming Trio, one of the fastest 1080 Ti graphics cards you can get. 2 gigahertz out of the box, basically. You can just dial up the overclock. This graphics card is massive. And I don't know about you, but carrying around this machine and shifting it around and things like that, having the extra support for a GPU that heavy really makes me feel better. Another nice feature of this case is that it has 2 vertical expansion slots as well as 8 regular expansion slots. So if you have one of the motherboards that's got a full, you know, by 8 or by 16 slot at the bottom of the motherboard, or you're going to run a 4-way configuration, or for some reason you need to put your graphics card in the last slot, the 7th slot, you've got that overhang for the 8th slot. So good work. Now, if you do need to use the 8th slot for something like a graphics card, you will lose the use of the storage unit brackets, which are the brackets that are meant to hold, you know, a 3.5-inch hard drive or 2.5-inch SSD. Not really a big deal. You've got other mounting options for SSDs. Now you have to be careful when taking the front off. I was trying to rock it off upwards and it actually just slides straight out. If you rock it upwards, you will break off the tabs on the front. Fortunately, it's not really a big deal. The tabs just help sort of make this edge a little bit more seamless than it otherwise would be. So if you do break the tabs, it's not really a big deal. Now the other metal side panel has basically the same mounting mechanism. I would have liked to have seen some sound dampening material on the metal panel, maybe. Maybe that would be an interesting option. But it does look like you can reverse the sides. Maybe that means it might be possible to order a, yeah, you totally can. You can reverse the sides. Maybe that might mean it would be possible to order another tempered glass side. Now behind the extra thick motherboard tray, looks like we've got room enough for 2 more 2.5-inch SSDs behind the motherboard tray, which is a pretty standard feature on mid-tower motherboard cases this time around. It's got a little bit more breathing room though because of the extra deep depth that we have on this particular case. We can also see here that we've got an RGB controller. We can see that we've got some removable trays here for 2.5-inch hard drives. So that means that this case could hold up to 4 3.5-inch drives or 6 2.5-inch drives, probably more if you get creative. Now I can tell you the power supply shroud is riveted in, it's non-removable. It has a cutout at the front that is just barely big enough for a 280 millimeter or 360 millimeter cooler. The 280 millimeter cooler I tested was the Corsair H115i, and it is just barely big enough. If you use thicker fans than the fans that come with the H115, it's not gonna work in this case. You're also not gonna be able to do a push-pull configuration. The front dust filter does cover the entire front of the case, and the front, while made of plastic, has a nice brushed metal overlay. It's kind of thin, but it gives it that nice texture. It doesn't pick up fingerprints too badly, but if you really mash your fingerprint down on there, it will pick up a fingerprint or two. I do have some concerns that the side vents are not gonna allow for sufficient airflow or sufficient breathing, especially if you've got a 360 millimeter radiator with really big fans. There is a small cutout on the bottom, but for me, I think I wish it were possible to just remove this entirely and just have this be open with no vent material, no vent plastic here. We'll just have to test it though and see. This case supports a standard ATX motherboard, micro ATX and mini ITX. It looks like there would be enough room for eATX, but there's no screw holes for it, so you might be able to make it work in a pinch, but I'm not gonna test it. So the Antec Luce P110. To get to know a case, you really need to build in it. And especially this case where it's kind of new, sort of interesting, something different from Antec. So where did we end up? Well, we ended up with a really nice system. This is a Core i7 8700K, 6 cores, 16 gigabytes of RAM. It has a 2 gigahertz overclock GPU. This is the fastest GTX 1080 Ti that I have ever tested. This is the MSI GTX 1080 Ti Trio. It is a massive, massive card, and it overclocks to 2 gigahertz, no problem. We've got our 8700K in here, which is running, I think 5 gigahertz. I think is where we ended up, 4.95 gigahertz maybe. We've got the Corsair H115i in the top. This build was interesting. There are some things that I would change about this case. There are some things that are imperfect in my opinion. Just some really minor changes that Antec could do to really make the build experience here a lot better, overall a lot more positive. But let's talk about the good stuff first. The top, the mesh, the filter, magnetic, easily removable. We've seen this feature on other cases. I think it works well. It gives you the option of running, dual 240 millimeter or 120 millimeter or whatever you want to do. We've got the H115i shoved in the top. We've got the front panel. We've got 220 millimeter fans in the front. You could also do 240 millimeter. You could do 360 radiator in the front. The cutout in the front is really large. I did try the H115i in the front. I know that's been a problem with some cases that have a built-in shroud, like the Antec built-in shroud. It worked great. This is a really, really beastly system. The motherboard is the MSI Gaming M5. So it's like the godlike gaming light, the demigod gaming, if you will. It's got 16 gigabytes of ADATA memory and a 256 gigabyte ADATA XPG NVMe. So it's insanely, insanely fast. One thing we ran into with our motherboard, we got the 2.5-inch, 3.5-inch caddy thing. Can't actually mount this in the case. It's in the way with the way that our motherboard connectors are. I think that the bottom of the motherboard was probably a little too close to all of the other peripherals, and so you potentially block one or both of these metal shrouds. In our case, it blocked one because of the USB 3 connections. At the back of the motherboard, there are no separators for the expansion slots. You've got the slot covers, but there's no little bars in between them. So your graphics cards and your other peripherals that are like double height will breathe a little better if they exhaust any air. out the back of the case. Now our MSI card has 3 fans. It dumps a crazy amount of heat into the system. You do dump some of the heat out the back, but by and large, it works really, really well. So this is the graphics card that's in this system. The MSI GeForce GTX 1080 Ti Gaming X Trio. This is literally the fastest GTX 1080 Ti that I have ever tested personally. 2 gigahertz out of the box, whisper quiet fan operation. They call it the Torx 2.0 fan. These things are unbelievable in how insanely fast this is. 2 gigahertz out of the box, basically. The overclock is no problem. It's got a huge heat sink. So that's in there. The other reason that I put that in there with the 5 gigahertz 8700K is also to check heat dissipation. How well did this thing do in terms of heat dissipation? Well, with the default fan profile and AIDA64 running a torture test on both the CPU and the GPU, things did get a little toasty on the inside. I think that I would probably redo, like Antec, if you're listening, I would probably redo these vents on the side. You do have a nice open space at the bottom that could probably be larger. The vents at the side here, I really think that those could be done differently. And I'm probably going to Dremel those out so that this is just open on the side. You don't really need these little vents. I don't think these little vents are doing you any favors in terms of airflow. Highly, highly recommend at least 2 fans at the front. In fact, I think I would recommend 2 140 millimeter fans at the front or 3 120s to get airflow, especially if you're going to do the top radiator. Now, the top radiator in this system was not without issue. It was actually very, very tricky to shove that in there. And I think with some motherboards, you may have trouble getting a cooler like the H115i to fit in the top of this case. With our, M5 gaming from MSI, it was no problem, but we did have to sort of like put the motherboard in and then kind of like wrangle it in one piece at a time without the fans, and then sort of install the fans after the fact with like a right angle screwdriver. It was sort of a pain, but we did get it in there and it did work. So yeah, that's the Antec Luce P110. And I have to confess, the Antec 900, the Antec 300, those are my go-to cases forever ago. And this from Antec, it's been a pleasant surprise. It's not a bad case. It works pretty well. Depending on what's on sale at Newegg and what you're looking for, this case may tick the boxes for you. If you do a build with this, you should post pictures and let us know in the forums at Level 1 Techs. I'm Wendell, I'm signing out, and I'll see you there.